Um, it should be incredible. So yeah, I'll pass over to you both. I hope everyone enjoys.
Excellent. Cool. Thank you for that then, Amelia. So I'll very briefly just introduce myself to Stacey and to everyone else. But my name's Adam Cousins, so I'm a lecturer here in sport and exercise psychology at Newcastle Uni, and I've been here for 6 years. And I'm going to be chairing this today with Laurie, one of our wonderful master's students as well. So we'll kind of take it in turns, kind of asking questions if that's cool. So, first of all, thank you so much for being here, Stacey. We really appreciate it. So Stacey's background, which I'm sure she'll tell us more about in a moment, but initially playing football and under 18 level for England, and then moving on to a boxing career. So a career that I'm sure a lot of athletes would be jealous of just in one sport, let alone two. So first question then from me then, Stacey, is just tell us a bit more about your background, really. That's what I'm really interested in to begin with.
Yeah, I didn't actually start in football and then go to boxing. It was the other way around.
Apologies. Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's complicated in the sense that I started boxing as a kid, but it was illegal for girls and women to box then. So I did and I didn't, if that makes sense. So I was still boxing in the gym that my granddad ran, sort of, all the time as a kid. And then when I got to the age of 11, when you can usually start boxing, that's when granddad told me, I wouldn't be able to because it was illegal for females in this country. So because I had a great love for football as well, and the ban had been lifted on women's football at that time, but the FA didn't officially recognise women's and girls football till 1993. So when I first started playing, there weren't, proper leagues and structures in place for girls and women's football. But gradually that happened. So for the next couple of, from sort of the age of 11, finding out that it was illegal till 29, my whole life was football. I did train for boxing in the off season, but I played in the Premier League here and played for, as you just said, for England youth, and then I went over to America and spent 5 years there, played a bit in Brazil, and then finished my playing career in Sweden. And then when I came back, women's boxing was legal by then over here. And also there was a national championship, Europeans, worlds, they were talking about it coming into the Olympics. So that's the point that I made the transition back to my first love, really, and pursuing that first dream of boxing that I didn't get to do first time round. And then, retired fully when I was 39. So I'd already started training quite well with a definite view to boxing a couple of years before I finished football. But I'd never stopped the training really. But yeah, so for a full decade, I got to, properly compete in the sport that I loved. So I was very, very fortunate to have two sports that I could pursue.
That's quite a journey you have there. I mean, so hopefully in today's talk as well, we'll cover kind of three main components: kind of motivation and performance, and then well-being. But just a question on that, how tough was that then in terms of from a motivating perspective for you then, knowing that actually your love was boxing, but you couldn't actually do it, and you didn't know necessarily when a ban might be dropped. That sounds incredibly tough from a motivation point of view. So how did you cope with that?
I'd never had a problem with motivation ever, and I still don't. That's another way that I'm really fortunate, that I wake up pretty much every day positive, with bags and bags of energy. So that, to be honest, that was never ever an issue. I was always going to do sport, always. I think just which sport depends on a number of factors. So where you live, like I'm from Manchester, so it's unlikely to be a surfer or something. So obviously environment has a big part in it, and your influences and the sports that you get to try to even find out whether you like it or not. But 100% I would have done a sport no matter what. So motivation wasn't an issue. And given the time that I found that out at like 11, I was a kid, so it just seemed weird to me that a sport could be illegal, because illegal meant to me as a 10, 11-year-old, like burglary and like actual crimes, not a kid doing a sport they loved. But it was something I'd come across in football as well, because in my very first game for my primary school team, you weren't allowed to play with boys then. But obviously there weren't any girls teams or anything. And partway through my first game with my primary school team, a coach and a parent on the other team recognised that I was a girl and shouted across the pitch and made me leave the pitch, and didn't have the words to articulate that at like 7 years old. But obviously I felt humiliated really, and like a weirdo just for doing the sport that I loved. And again, for lots of kids, you know, that's it, you know, it sort of prevents them from even pursuing that hobby or sport or whatever it might be that the stigma's attached to, which of course can be the case for boys as well, depending on what it is they're doing. But I just wasn't wired that way. And I went home and I said, Mum, you're going to have to cut my hair short. She was a crap hairdresser, but she gave me this shocking bowl cut, and off I went. And I was given a boy's name, and I went and played as a boy effectively, which you can do as a little kid. Obviously, as you get older, it's not so much the case. But by the time I'd got to sort of 12, 13, the FA had got involved, and I found my first girls football team, and it went from there. So it's not something that I hadn't come across before anyway.
Stacey, just while on the motivation theme, I was listening to one of your TED talks. I was just doing some homework before I went on the call, and you were talking about winning being one of your main sources of motivation. When you were sort of younger and on the way up, just being introduced to sort of football, was that still your main motivation then? Because I could see that being challenging if it's more difficult to win, obviously, when you're younger.
Yeah, I think it's one of, definitely. I was always a really, really competitive kid, and enjoyment for me came through competition. It was, and I can totally see that for some people that you know, just being there, being involved with it is what brings them joy, and that's fine. I wasn't one of them, and I'm still not. It was important for me to, the pursuit of winning was part of the enjoyment for me. However, obviously things change for all of us, no matter what it is, whether you're talking about life in general or your work or your studies or whatever it is. Your why, if you like, your purpose will evolve and change as you grow and you have different experiences along the way. And that's exactly the same for me. So as a kid, you know, that social aspect was really important. Me feeling that sense of belonging where I was and being with all my mates, and you kind of find that group that you feel like you fit in with was important, etc., etc. And although it's a similar thing as you get older, it's different the way it manifests. So I wouldn't say winning was the sole thing for me, but it definitely has been key for me throughout my life. Yeah.
And great question out, Lolly. I really like that. So in terms of from a coach's perspective, so you've obviously been highly driven from a young age there, Stacey, but what role do you think a coach can have in influencing an athlete's motivation, and perhaps in your case, maybe it's trying to manage expectation or just kind of, you know, work with an athlete who's, you know, very, very motivated?
Personally, for me, I don't think a coach can do much unless they've built a relationship with you. So you can name anything. How did they do A, B, C, X, Y, Z? There's all different strategies, and there isn't one answer to it, because all coaches, like athletes, are unique and individual and have their own way of getting the best out of an athlete. So I wouldn't say there's a one straight answer to how a coach does anything in particular. What I would say is key for me is building a relationship, because if a coach builds a relationship with that athlete or those athletes in a team environment, then they're more likely to get the best out of them, because you trust in the advice that they're giving you. You trust that they want what's best for you, and that they're, you know, they've got your back kind of thing, and that they're invested in you as a person as well as an athlete. So I think you could ask any question of how, but I think the key for me is that the coaches that I've believed have cared about me as a person and my teammates, who have taken the time to sort of, you know, get to know you and build a relationship. I've always, you know, wanted to run through brick walls for them. The others who are there for other reasons, or they're just not, you know, they don't, not able to build those relationships, then they're just there. They're just our coach, you know. And there's an enormous difference between the ones that are just there and the ones that impact and influence your life forever in all aspects of your life. It's a very, very special thing having a coach who can do that.
Excellent.
That's interesting. We were listening to some talks this morning on coach-athlete relationships and how important they are. That's really interesting that that's the bit you've picked out as the most important from the coach. Our last question on the motivation type questions on why you play the sport. I know you mentioned before that you're really lucky that you're always really motivated when you wake up in the morning. Are there any times in your career that you haven't felt like that, or you felt like you've sort of struggled to be motivated at all?
Never. I've struggled with the things that most athletes are going to struggle with. Losing, injury, definitely. I mean, I've had 12 broken bones and 9 surgeries along the way. So sport's not that good for your body overall. Certainly not contact sport. But to that, obviously, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's lack of motivation. It's more the motivation to get back, and there's something in your way, or you feel like you've put your heart and soul into something. And I think there's things that you learn as you go along. I think one of the things that we do, particularly in sport, is promote, if that's the right word, this idea that and you hear athletes say it all the time, if you work hard, you can achieve anything. That's not true. If you really put everything into it and you believe in yourself, then you'll get there. That's not true either. And I understand why they do that. And it is about motivation and building athletes' belief. But when you do believe that and you do put absolutely everything in, and you have, left no stone unturned, and you've lived the life, and you've committed yourself completely to it, and you do believe, and you follow the instructions of your coach, and then you lose as an individual or as a team, you realize that that's just not the case. It's exactly like life. There's people who don't deserve bad things and they happen to them, and people who deserve great things and they don't happen to them. There's no explanation for it. Life just doesn't work like that, and neither does sport. It's so unbelievably cruel sometimes. I mean, it's the best thing in your life to be part of, in whatever capacity, whether that's a coach or doesn't matter what role. It is the best thing to be involved with, but it does break your heart. It absolutely crushes your soul sometimes. That's the truth of it. But that's the risk that you've got to be willing to take. That's the level of motivation that you've got to have, that, like I say, injuries aren't good. Getting really badly hurt isn't good, like can happen in boxing. But that's not the biggest risk I ever saw. The biggest risk I ever saw was the total and complete heartbreak and devastation that committing yourself to something and giving it that much can bring. And so that motivation never went for me, no matter how brutal those setbacks were. It just didn't take it away for me.
And so with that then, Stacey, I mean, being able to stay motivated during even the tougher times of your career, we know other athletes might not always be able to share that kind of mindset. So what role did you have, do you think, as advocate? I know boxing's predominantly an individual sport, but in your experience of being an athlete, how do you think you've influenced other people in terms of motivation from being a highly motivated person yourself? Do you think you have, or have you just left people to do their own thing, do you think?
Do you know what? I think, Adam, it can have both impacts. When you're a very energetic, highly motivated person, it can make people feel like, do you know what I mean? Because if that's not in them for whatever reason, or they can't obtain that at that time for whatever reason, something else is going on, then it can actually make it seem like an even bigger mountain to climb for them to reach their motivational peak. It is perhaps not the right way to put it, but I think you know what I'm trying to say. For others, though, they will absolutely see that and go, right. So like when we're on camps with England, I'd be staying to do extra stuff. For some people, they think, oh God, I just can't do that. And it actually makes them feel more negative. Whereas others will go, right, I'm going to stay out. And it's exactly the same when I was in America. I used to stay out every day working on something extra because I'd never had the opportunity here. I'd be working full time in the day, drive all the way to Doncaster, do a 2-hour training session, have to drive all the way home because I'd work the next morning. So this idea that I could stay out on the pitch in the sun, no less, because I was in Texas and it was really warm, and just enjoy trying to, you know, get better and better at things was a wonderful thing. Now, some players, that was like, why am I not doing that? Why do I not have the, and it'd be worse for them. Others, you know, bit by bit, started getting more and more and more coming out, and it changed the culture of the team. So I would say it depends. I think you've just got to try and lead by that example. And I've always pretty much waited for people to come to me, unless I've really thought, is this person unable to reach out, but they do need something? And you've just got to try and go with your heart on that one. And so long as you can answer honestly that I'm doing this to try and help that person, it's nothing to do with me. Like, I'm not trying to go, oh, look, here I am, or I know best, or anything. You know, it's not about you. It's about, how can I help this person? It might even be a question, just not even giving advice, but just asking them a question. So long as it's, the emphasis is on them, then you have to go with your heart on that one, I think. But I've never been one of them to try and put stuff on other people, because it's I think you've just got to let them find their own path and support them as much as you can. And that's certainly what I did when I was a captain over in America anyway, because that was your role.
Just jumping on that as well, am I right in thinking that you teach PE, Stacey? Is that right?
No, I did. I worked in a school for
right.
12 years in our support unit, which was for the kids who were on the verge of exclusion. But for the last 4 years, I left the school because I was getting really busy with broadcasting. So now I'm full-time doing the commentary and radio broadcasting in sport.
Got you. Was the people not being as motivated to play in the school? Did you find that something that was difficult because it was so different from your experiences when working with the players at the school?
That's precisely one of the reasons why. There's many reasons why I didn't want to go into coaching, but that would be one of them, that I just could not be doing with people who didn't give everything. And I know that, and you've got to be honest about that. And so that's why I wouldn't want to go into it, because they'd just do me head in. I know they would. So, and that's not right. That's not the right way to go into it. So I haven't got the right mentality to be a coach and deal with people who, in what would be only my opinion, which I wouldn't know what was going in the background, or what, I wouldn't be interested either. I'd just want them to give the best. If they didn't, it'd do me head in. So I know that coaching isn't for me, but I do enjoy it. Like, I'll go to our gym and do stuff. I'm doing one this afternoon with a couple of kids who are, you know, the 3 fights in, and they're just that kind of stuff. Yeah. But elite people who mess about, I can talk about it and appreciate it from, you know, a broadcasting point of view or whatever. But if I was the coach, I just know I just couldn't be doing with it.
Yeah. So just moving on a bit, I mean, you touched upon performance a little bit there, Stacey, but looking at that a little bit more in detail, can you just tell us, from your experience of being within kind of British boxing, what sports psych provision kind of is there, and do you think it's sufficient at the moment for athletes?
I had my very first experience of sports psychology was at Doncaster Bells, and we'd never ever done anything like that before. We'd done about 2 minutes of it when we filled in some sort of survey with England under 18s, and that was it. We didn't hear back from it. I don't know what it was for or whatever, and that was it. And then before the we had like an FA Cup final and a Charity Shield game, and before that, the coach Julie Chipchase brought in. She brought in like a sports psychologist to help us prepare for the game, because it was a massive game and we'd never done anything like that before. So what happened was we worked with him for a few weeks in the build up, and then we went a goal down in the game, and we took a throw in really quickly, and me and my mate Mel Garside, who was our striker, I put the ball through a tee, she scored. And I remember in our celebration go, Jesus, it's worked. It's worked. That psychology stuff. And then we lost 5-2 and we're like, that psychology shit. It's rubbish. It was so funny because we were like, yeah, it works. It's great. And then we're like, no, it doesn't. So that was my very first like experience of it. But I do remember it, like picking things up from it and thinking, oh, that's really interesting. And from there, I started reading loads of sports psychology books. And I just couldn't believe how much it helped me. And it's something I really, really wish I'd have come across or been introduced to from early on. Obviously, it has to be age appropriate. No point doing certain things with like 9-year-olds or whatever. But I think as soon as I became serious about my sport, it would have helped me immensely. And in boxing, we had Chris Marshall, who was working. I think he does a lot with cricket now, but he was at boxing at the time, and he was the person who pretty much totally changed things for Froch for the rematch with Groves. And he came with us to the Europeans, and we had a first meeting the first week of the European tournament, and he said, "What do you want to get out of this?" And I told him what I wanted, the most important thing to me at that tournament, and he kind of went, oh right, and then helped me achieve that, and he had an immense impact in that short time. So I'm a massive advocate for sports psychology. I think it's done right. Incredible.
And so just to jump in there, Laurie, just a follow-up question. So I've been watching a bit of the Full Swing documentary, which is a golf documentary. You see a lot of these kind of sporting documentaries now. And on one of them, I was watching last night, they introduced, or the caddy suggested, that the golfer needs to go and speak to a sports psychologist. And you can see he was really kind of reluctant. So when you had that for the FA Cup final and they brought in a sports psych for that kind of game, what was the kind of feedback from the athletes? In the footballers that you had, did some people kind of take to it, or was there kind of some resistance at all? And from your experience, is this something that athletes need to discover for themselves, or do people need to be introduced to it so that they know actually these are some benefits?
I think it's really mixed. I mean, it was mixed with us because you didn't really hear of it back then. Now it's a lot more normalized, which is great. It's a fairly standard thing, I would say, for particularly once you reach a certain level. But it was really mixed at the time, and it was obviously, there's also the thing from a player's point of view of, like you wouldn't eat something completely different before an FA Cup final that you'd eat in the rest of the year. Why would you do that? Because you don't want to risk it. And it's the same with the mind. So I would say it's obviously better to become familiar with whether it's, it doesn't matter whether it's in a sports psychologist by title and trade, or it's books you read, or it's whatever it is. But the other thing I think that's really, really important that I found, certainly when we're at the Europeans and the World Championships and stuff like that with boxing, is that every single person on the GB team knew how to deal with the fighters. In my opinion, I thought they dealt with it really well. So I don't think sports psychology should be something where in a team environment or any sporting environment where you say that's the sports psychologist and that's the person who talks about that stuff. Everybody needs to, because do you know what? When you're an athlete and I had to have an injection in my hand before the European final because my knuckle was coming off a bit because the tendon had thingied. So anyway, I had to have a pain numbing injection because I couldn't really use it, but it was just a matter of, as long as I could make a fist and pass the medical, then I was in the fight, and then you just hope to God that your adrenaline does the rest. And I was sat with the physio the night before that final for 40 minutes while he was administering treatment on that hand. That person needs to have an understanding of sports psychology, because that person was spending 40 minutes with me the night before what at that point was the biggest fight of my life. Then you might sit in the morning with the video analyst, and when they've shown you the video and gone through the stuff and, look for when they drop the hand here and can you get the overhand right there, whatever it might be, then at the end you might go, right, if they can pick up that little body language from you means you're worried or you whatever, and they have the right words to say in that moment, everybody needs to have a bit of an understanding about sports psychology. And one of the things I thought they did what was really good at GB boxing a while ago is that they got the staff to have a box off. So the staff all had to do a couple of rounds against each other. And some of these staff members who've been saying, when you were getting ready to fight, and you were like, when the nerves are like nothing in boxing, it is like electricity going through your veins. It's unbelievable. And they'd be like, oh, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. They were absolutely in a date when they were getting like, you know, like the blood had drained from the face, they were pale white, they were like, we're like, look at the state of you now you're fighting. But you know what, it was really good because they got a real understanding, as you're talking about people who, I'm not meaning to be offensive, but who've been behind, you know, the paperwork and research and been doing 3 million years of study. That's not the same as getting in the ring and being punched in the face. Once you understand what that's like, then you can put it together with, you know, it's not everybody has to do it, but it did make a big difference of them understanding what boxers were actually going through when you're walking to the ring and, you know, someone's going to be trying to leather you. So that was actually really effective. But yeah, I would say it's dead important that everybody has a bit of an understanding over it, because you might be the last person to have that key conversation with the athlete, or just at a time when they're starting to, you know, that it's like this, it's not linear, is it? It's like that, your emotions building up to a big game or fight or match or whatever. You could have, as a staff member, see him in the lift, see him in the canteen, whatever. That one little thing you say at that fragile point of an athlete's mind could be crucial. So everybody, I think, should have a bit of an understanding of saying the right things at the right time, or at least not saying the wrong thing. And I'd just give a dead quick example about one of our coaches, who I was actually being a mentor at the youth Europeans in boxing. And we had a young girl who just absolutely fell to pieces in the morning, like, just, I can't fight, I can't do this, you know, really. And we were like, oh God, what we're going to do? And we were trying everything in the changing rooms, as the coach who was going to do her corner was with another fighter at the time, which doesn't help, but sometimes that's just the nature of international tournaments. Anyway, so we're saying to her, of course you can do this, you know, you've worked so hard to be here, you know, all the things that you would say. And anyway, the coach came back in and I said, oh, can I just have a quick word? He went outside and I said, she didn't want to fight. She said, what do you mean? I said, she's just like gone to pieces, she's fallen apart. Like, we've said this, we've said that. And she went, right, okay, give me a minute. And the coach goes in and she says, you doing all right? You doing? And she went, she didn't speak. And she said, right. She said, you don't want to fight? And she went, no. She went, no problem. I'll go and tell them. And we were all going, what are you doing? What on earth are you doing? And she went, no, it's fine. She said, I'll just go and tell them you're pulling out. I'll say, you know, you don't want to do it, or can say you've got an injury or whatever. No problem. She said, I'll be back in a minute. And she goes out and this fighter was like, no, I do want to fight. And I went, well, you better tell us quick, because she's going to go and like pull you out of this fight. No, I do. And she went in like 2 minutes from not wanting to fight to being desperate to get in there. And I went and grabbed the coach. She hadn't even got, she was literally stood outside the door, like behind the door. And I was like, you bugger. And she came back in and she said, are you sure? And she went, yes, because I'm not interested in forcing kids to get into a fight they don't want to be in. So are you sure you want to get in there? And she went, right. And she went, should we do this then? And she went, yeah. She absolutely smashed the girl to bits in the fight. And afterwards, she said, that's the takeaway method. She said, if somebody thinks they don't want to do something then that they've worked for, it's just the mind trying to protect them. It's just the nerves that they've allowed to take over them. So take it away, they'll still want to do it. And I use that every time then, that when I got dead nervous, and I still use it now if I'm really, really nervous, like when I was presenting on the radio for the FA Cup final of the week, obviously you're nervous, you don't want to get things wrong, there's a lot of pressure, there's lots of things happening. And you go, what would you say if somebody said, okay, walk away, you don't have to do it? You go, no, let me do it. And it's a really good one for anything you're doing, the takeaway method. If you know you wouldn't walk away, you want to do it. And that was unbelievable sports psychology from a coach, not a sports psychologist. But that's also knowing your fighter. It was just genius.
Yeah, I think you've touched upon right back to that coach-athlete relationship and how important that is underpinning all these different things. I'm just interested, you were talking that you'd found an interest in sports psychology more recently, and you said that you were interested or you thought that it could have had a huge impact earlier on in your career. What sort of a support might that have looked like? Do you know?
I mean, I think just being introduced to it in the first place would have been good. And I think we're really, really fortunate, actually, that we have a thing called sports psychology, because I got chatting to a pianist a few years ago who said, how do you deal with the nerves? And I ended up doing a talk all about performance anxiety. I've only ever done it once. It was just a one-off, but I did it at the Royal Northern College of Music, and she was explaining that that's exactly what musicians get, nerves about performance, just like athletes. She said, but there isn't music psychology. It doesn't exist. She said, so she reads loads of sports psychology books and has loads of her students read sports psychology books because the same principles apply for music. And I'd never, ever thought about that. So I actually think we're really lucky that there's a thing that exists that's literally for us, for sports people. I think that's fantastic that coaches can utilize, and, you know, the team behind the team, all the staff can utilize, and certainly the athletes can use. And as I say, used well, it's there's so much that I've read in sports psychology books that I can pinpoint a time when I didn't do that or did do that, whichever way, as a young athlete, and thought, bloody hell. But it's just not something that I really understood and fully was able to take on until my 30s, which was a shame. But, you know, at least I've had the benefit from it then. And hopefully I can use that to help other young athletes by sharing my experiences.
So it's almost an introduction to sports psychology as a whole, and then give the athletes the chance to look at the bits they want to look at, rather than necessarily being shown particular intervention strategies or things like that.
Yeah, I mean, and again, there's not going to be one answer to that, because what would work for you, Laurie, and you, Adam, would be different to me. So I don't think you can say for all athletes to access it, this is what needs, because you'll also get athletes who don't want that, who find that actually, just like in the boxing gym, we've had coaches who've been just dedicated to shouting their heads off as loud as they can throughout an entire 2-hour session, because that's what they feel is motivating everybody. Some boxers will respond to that. For me, it drove me insane, because I had my own voice in my head that would motivate me. It'd be like, one more, or do this or do that. So it's not something that works for everybody. I think just an introduction of sorts to sports psychology, that, you know, that it's a thing, that it can help. And I think if athletes are given example of other athletes and ways that it's worked, that's a relatable, like the power of storytelling is unbelievable. I think it can be a bit boring, like anything, if you say, oh, statistically this and da-da-da. No one's interested in that. If you say, you know, when Ronda Rousey tried this in the UFC, or when Tiger Woods tried that in golf, or, you know, when that situation with Carl Froch, when he was at, real life stories of athletes you can relate to, or that you admire, or that you know of, then I think that can be perhaps a good introduction, I would say, because it's storytelling and it's something that you can relate to, whether you play Sunday League football or whether you've got aspirations to play for England, whatever. So maybe that way, because every single human can absorb a story. So how you go on from there will be unique. But I do think what every person has in common, and every child can tell you a story, whether it's about Santa Claus or tooth fairies or whatever their culture might be, they can pass down stories that have been passed down to them. We can all absorb them. So maybe if it's done through storytelling initially, but then you can go into the niche subjects that are relatable for that individual, perhaps.
Stacey, just last question for me. I'm just kind of wary of your time. So we've got a chance for the people to ask questions. I've got loads that I want to ask myself first. But so one I will ask then, and something that we know is unique to boxing. And am I right in thinking in your professional record there is no losses on there at all then, Stacey?
Not as a professional, no. I did
All
as
right,
a amateur. I had losses in amateur.
What thing to have. So from a confidence point of view, what was it like having that 0 on your resume that you hadn't lost before? And then what impact does it have for some fighters, or either for yourself, when you've come up against opponents who you know have never lost, or at that level they've never lost before? Because that's quite unique to that sport, I think. So what did that look like and feel like for you?
I think it just depends where you're at on your own. I don't know if journey is the right word, but your own progress or whatever as an athlete. Again, I don't think I can't speak for everybody, because obviously one athlete might come up against somebody who's unbeaten and think, no one's done this before. Another athlete might love that. Like, I would have liked that and gone, great, well, I'm going to be the first to beat them then. But that's not to say you just think that every second of camp. You know, you're going to have some days where you're not quite on it in sparring, and then you go, oh God, can I actually do this? And then you have a great spar and you're like, yeah, of course I can. And then I'm going to beat them. And then I'm going to beat them. You know, ideally I would have liked to have been a bit more steady as an athlete. And I would as a human being, but then I am who I am. And I tend to be like that anyway. So yeah, I think, I don't know. I think it's unique to each one. I think the most important thing, though, is what you take from it after. So there was, just as a quick example, one of my losses as an amateur came to an Irish girl who'd been to the World Championships, and she'd gone really far in the World Championships, and it was only my 6th fight or whatever. And I was a person who liked to know as much as I could about my opponent. Other boxers didn't want to know anything at all. I wanted to know everything I could find on them. And it doesn't necessarily make a difference when you're in there, but it's controlling the controllables, isn't it? And I used to think, well, at least I'll know this, that, and the other. And I knew of her background, and I went into it, and it wasn't great on the day. Like, they thought the doctor didn't turn up, so the show was cancelled. And they said, right, we're going to do it sparring, so all your adrenaline comes down. Then they go, right, we've got a doctor now, it's back on. And it was like, oh my God. And with the inexperience, I struggled with that, because like I said, only my 6th fight, and I'd already had this big thing in my head that she'd been to the Worlds and she'd done this and she'd done that. In that fight, I fought small, if that makes sense. And thank God we had a video, like somebody video, and I always used to have my fights videoed so I could watch them back, because feelings are not reliable. And just like when any of you might go for a run or cycling or do whatever activity you do, some days you feel horrendous doing a 3-mile run, and some days you feel great. They can be exactly the same times. It's feelings. And I watched the video back and I thought, I knew I could have beaten her. I knew I could. And I was really angry with myself, because I thought, you lost that fight. And I just promised myself that I would never, ever, ever beat myself again. Somebody better could beat me, and that did happen, but never, ever myself again. And so actually, I was grateful in a way of that loss, because I realized that I can cope with things much better if I've got the 2 P's, purpose and positive. So if I find the purpose in something that's happened, and I can find a positive in something that's happened, that's in sport or in life, then it fuels me no end. The difficult bit is that bit in between. When I haven't quite figured out the purpose of why this has happened and what the positive is going to be, that's a crap time for me. That's the downside. But once I go, right, that's why that's happened. That's what I was meant to learn. And this is what I'm going to do with it. I'm off. And it took a couple of weeks. And then I went, right, that's what I'm supposed to learn, you idiot. You beat yourself. You're now never, ever going to let that happen again. Every time you leave the ring from now, you'll know you've given absolutely everything. And I did. So that, I think there's a great deal to take from losing. And I think certainly in boxing, far too much emphasis is put on the O. Sometimes it's because they've fought absolutely crap boxers to pad the record, and they've not fought anybody decent. So I don't think you can read too much into it sometimes anyway. And, if you've given absolutely everything and stepped up and had the courage to do it, why should you be knocked because you've got a loss on your record, rather than playing it safe and fighting people you can beat? That's rubbish.
Yeah, I mean, I'm undefeated. I've never had a fight, but that's not the point. But I'm just wary of your time, Stacey. So if you need to head, then just let us know. But
I'm just going to message them and see if I can put this meeting back. So you just carry on. I'm just going to.
Apologies.
It's all right.
If you have to shoot, that's absolutely fine, because it's been really, really interesting. So I found it interesting, and I hope other people have as well. But so we've got a couple of questions there. So if Stacey does have time, we'll go to Sabrina's question first, and then Laurie, if you want to pick a question after that. But yeah, we'll just see there with Stacey. I know was hoping to kind of touch upon well-being, and I think Stacey kind of did a little bit along different things, but we didn't have specific questions on that. But that's fine. If we don't get to all of the questions now, I'm sure Stacey would be willing if you could email Stacey or get in touch with us, and we can get in touch with Stacey. That'd be fine. But just on that, Stacey, if you do have time, Sabrina did ask, have you ever experienced fear of re-injury when returning to sport? And if so, how did you overcome this?
Did they ever experience what, sorry?
Did you ever experience fear of re-injury
Oh.
in your sport? And if so, how did you overcome that?
I didn't just have a fear of it, it bloody happened over and over again. So yeah, no, yeah, the injury was probably one of my biggest fears, because you know, I've never ever had an injury in sport that hasn't hugely affected me mentally, because it takes away your identity, takes away your purpose, takes away the point to everything, which obviously isn't healthy. You know, it's not good to completely identify yourself and have everything wrapped up in a sport or anything, whether it's a relationship, a job, it don't matter. It's not good because it's an external thing. That's something you have to try and learn along the way, but it's also a difficult balance, because to get to the level you want to get to and, you know, be the best that you can be, you kind of have to do that. So it's a difficult one. And that's what I'm saying, that you've got to be willing to do that. But what comes with it is utter devastation if you do get injured and things like that. So yeah, fear of injury was always a massive one for me, because it took away a huge part of me and my life.
The next question in the chat is on a similar vein. It's also about injuries. It's talking about losing as well. Oh, that's my dishwasher. Can you hear that next door? Just ignore that.
No, can't hear it.
What was it that you found most difficult about being a professional athlete? That was the question.
Being a female professional athlete in the sports that I was in.
And within injuries or losing or anything like that, did you feel like any of that, the support you got was related to being a female athlete?
I think it's, when I say female, I don't mean actually being a female. Like, there's nothing about my physiology or my sex that makes it, you know, more difficult. It's the society that you live in. That's what I mean, just to clarify. So the fact that I couldn't go to the Olympics is 100% only because I'm female, because when they brought women's boxing in, those of us that were on the England team at the time were just like, the excitement and what that meant to us, I cannot even put into words to you. It's the pinnacle. And we all thought, oh my God, it's actually going to happen for us. Then when they announced the weight categories, that I can move this meeting to 3 o'clock. So I know we're not going to be that long, but we're all right now. We'll do that. Just let me reply. Sorry. Yes. Thank you. Brilliant. Right. Yeah. So what was I talking about?
The Olympics.
Weight categories.
Oh yeah, the weight categories. That's it. So when we were dead excited, we were like, oh my God, this is it. We're going to get our chance. When they announced it, there was only 3 weight categories for women. There was 10 for men. We all, you know, competed in the Worlds and the Europeans at 10 categories. So I was right in the middle, because when they announced it, I was a 69 kilogram boxer and there was 60 or 75. So it's, I mean, they're just huge differences, those. And it was absolutely devastating. So that was a very direct example, but there's lots and lots of other examples. In terms of injuries, the fact that we didn't have funding, so I wasn't a funded boxer, I had to work, which obviously isn't conducive to, you know, being able to train in the way you did, like I could in football in America when I played over there. And also we didn't have the medical setup that they did. So when I got my hand injury, that was done through GB, funded, and it was unbelievable. Like, I saw the top hand surgeon, it was unbelievable. When it was boxing for England, which didn't have the same funding, because obviously it wasn't in the new, then the categories weren't in. I had a really routine knee injury. It was just meniscus, a little tear. So we were going to have it sorted. It should have been done within 6 weeks. And I was getting ready for the World Championships. And I did it just in our gym sparring. And I had to go through the NHS, which, you know, 99 out of 100 times is going to be fantastic. And the NHS is amazing. But on this occasion, it wasn't. And they outsourced it to some other place, whatever. And I got it done, and they caused a horrific burn on my leg, a second degree chemical burn all over my leg, and it got infected. I got extremely ill. I was rushed to hospital. I was 12 months out. That wouldn't have happened if the funding was properly in place. if equality was in place, and it all goes back to that. So, yeah, the lack of equality in terms of the infrastructure around the athlete and everything that comes with it was hugely detrimental to me as an athlete. Yeah, definitely.
And just last question then, Stacey, because I know, thanks for pushing that meeting back, and we'll have a quick 10-minute break for people in between afterwards. But just very quickly, Blake's asked, were there any cultural differences then between sporting environments, between boxing and football, in terms of help seeking and openness to mental health? Which I think is a great question, Blake.
It's a really good question. That was that from Blake, was it? Thank Blake. That's a really good question. I think, do you know what? I don't think it's a matter of just simply comparing football and boxing, because I think there's as many differences between different football clubs as there are between different boxing clubs. It's not necessarily the sports, it's the cultures within each one. I mean, you could say that boxing's better at it than football, but there'll be loads of gyms that aren't and loads of football clubs that aren't. So what I would say is that I think, and also there'll be different experiences for males and females in those sports as well, I would think. So speaking from my point of view, I think they've both got much better, that's for sure, 100%. I think the both, I mean, the difference that I've seen in the boxing gym from going in there at first as like a 6-7-year-old kid to going in there now, for example, night and day, like a huge difference in the way that things are done, the way that the interaction and relationships between coaches and the kids, for example, completely different. Not that they did it wrong back in the day necessarily. It's just very different now, and we're more aware and we've learnt things, whatever. And I would say exactly the same with football. So I think the important thing is that they've both got much better at doing that. That said, there's a big difference between coaching environments and club environments where people are there to just get fit or to just enjoy it, see the friends, socialize, whatever, and the elite level. Very, very different. And there's a lot that we need to be doing much better, particularly at the elite level, of putting people and human beings on the same level as importance as medals. And I know that's difficult, but you as a sport have to decide, really. Again, there's no right or wrong answer, is there? It's what culture is right for you. But I think to finish rounding up that question, I think the most important thing for you all to take, because you might not necessarily take much from that answer, it's more about what can you do is I think whatever you're doing, whatever role any of you are already doing now in sport or will go on to do, I would say be really, really clear on what we usually refer to as trademark behaviours. Because what you can have on a gym wall or a football club website or wherever is a set of values, a list of values, which is great. That's really good that people have that. But just like a business, nobody's going to put, on the website, we're not that reliable, like probably won't ring you back. We're not really bothered if you don't get a refund. Like, they're going to say, we're reliable, you can trust us, we're the best. That's what they're going to do. None of that really matters unless the trademark behaviours live up to it. So I think, Pep Guardiola is an example of this when he was at Barca, that he had he had the sets of values, like work hard, humility, put the team first. Those were his 3 values, but it's what they look like. And he had specific trademark behaviours. So, for example, when the players came to any football related thing, like training, games, whatever, they all had to drive the same car. I mean, they weren't crap cars, they were decent, but they weren't what, you wouldn't have like a grounds person or catering staff or whatever turning up, on this crappy little car, and then them in like these £3 million sports cars or whatever. And that was about humility. So what does humility actually look like? So for you as individuals, because it's like me saying, like you just asked me at the beginning, Adam, about winning. It's all very well me saying, I wanted to win. I wanted to see, what does that actually look like? It means trying to be the best on your worst day. It means giving your best, even if you've got a bit of a cold or you're a bit tired or you haven't had a good night's sleep or there's stuff going on in the background, that once you step over that onto that pitch, or once you get into that boxing gym, you give your absolute best no matter what, that you take the challenges. Do you want to spar that person who's won this, that, and the other? Yeah, I do. I want to test myself against them. Do you want to go to Zimbabwe and fight for the Commonwealth title like we got asked to? Yeah, all right, let's do it. You know, it's taking those are all trademark behaviors, and you'll all have come across loads of athletes and loads of people who say, these are my values, and you know full well their trademark behaviors do not match. So just don't be one of those people. If you're a coach and you are going to say relationships are important, what are your actual trademark behaviors? Are you in a position where any player at any time can come to you? Even if you think it's something silly, are you going to treat it with respect? Are you going to treat them with dignity? Are you going to treat them as a human being? Are you going to look at the whole athlete? Are you going to be like that with your team? Are you going to make sure you show appreciation for the people who are doing the so-called little jobs that actually make the massive difference when you're at tournaments and stuff like that? So trademark behaviors, you don't need 10, 2 or 3. That is it. That you, on any day, I could meet you, Adam, or you, Laurie, and it doesn't matter what's been going on or what's in the background. That is what I can expect from you every single time, that consistency of your trademark behaviors. And that will make a big difference, because part of the problem in sport is talking about mental health as if it's over here and then doing all this stuff that wrecks people's mental health. It's stupid. It doesn't don't do these things and then this ought not to be a problem. So if your trademark behaviors are right, you probably won't have a massive problem with that in the end anyway.
Well, I love that, Stacey. That's brilliant. And, on behalf of all of us here, thank you so much for that. That's a really great insight from an athlete's perspective. So, yeah, I found that really interesting. I could talk all day to you about this kind of stuff, but thank you so much for your time. I know there's other questions there that we don't quite have time for just now, but we'll try and get them across to Stacey in some format. But yeah, just from all of us, thank you very much for that. And I'll hand back over to Amelia. But yeah, thank you again.
Well, thanks very much for having me, everyone, and all the best with what you're doing. And I'm on all the Instagram and stuff, Stacey Copeland Boxer. So if there's something you really want to ask, or you need help with something that you're doing, then just give us a shout anytime, because I'm always happy to help with stuff like that. So and best of luck to everyone with what you're doing, and thanks for having me. Cheers.
Thanks, Stacey.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Stacey.
Thank you for pushing your meeting back as well. It is greatly appreciated.
All right.
So we'll have a very short break now. So we'll kick off with the coach talks at 20 past. I will just share my screen really quickly so I can show you what's going on at 2, which the time is flying by today.